Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Kubernetes by Example Insider. I had grand plans to do this from the fancy new, sometimes referred to as Jenga building that is part of BU's campus. But I got almost everything set up and kind of ran out of time. It's kind of one of those days. So here I am in my very spare old office. As you can see, the scarves are missing. It's very depressing. The lighting is terrible, and etc. So, but hopefully I sound okay. And just by way of introduction, I'm Langdon White. I am a faculty member at Boston University, and I host the show along with it's one of several of our guest hosts. Today we have Savita, and do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Savita Raghunathan, and it's my pleasure to be on this show, and it's my fifth time, and it gets better and better. What can I say? And it's a special episode. It's just before the holidays, so I'm super excited to be here and talk to my good friend Divya.
Yeah, and so we welcome Divya Mohan to the show, and we'll talk about a bunch of stuff. But Divya, do you want to, introduce yourself, give a little bit of background on who you are?
Yeah, sure. So hi, and thank you, Savita, for having me on the show, and thank you, Lan, and thank you the rest of the team that's gone to like great lengths to organize this just before the holidays. I know how, terribly hectic it can get for a lot of folks out there. Because before the holidays, everything tends to start getting a little wonky. Everything tends to slow down. So I'm really, really glad that I'm on the show and I get to, chat with y'all. So I am a senior technical evangelist at SUSE, at my day job. And over and above all the work that I do in the open source space, as part of my day job, I'm also, one of the documentation maintainers for the Kubernetes project. I get to lead with some very awesome people. And basically, I have been around in the Kubernetes ecosystem for around 3 years. I think 2 years as of now, but it's been a very fun ride, and I've learned a lot in the process. So uh, I try to give it back via my role as a CNCF ambassador, and yeah, I think that's a little bit about me. And we can talk about this all day because it's my favorite topic. Like, I'm my favorite topic to talk about every single day. So yeah, that's me.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. I would like to clarify that this is my last week of classes, and so that is why this is also a crazy time for me. Um, but once the classes are over and then finals begin, things definitely start to slow down for the holidays and semester break. It's kind of crazy. Um, so let's see. To kind of get right into it. So what does it mean that you do when you kind of are? We talk about technical evangelism. You know, and it's a new enough role that different people have kind of different definitions of it. So what is it
Yeah.
exactly that you do in that kind of job?
Yeah. So to be really, really honest and fair with you, 2 years back when I was, at my previous job with HSBC, I did not have an idea this existed in the very first place. Like, it was very, very eye opening to see that, there is something that actually is there out in this ecosystem and in this industry that helps bridge the gap between developers and the projects or the products that they consume. So essentially, technical evangelism or technical evangelist really just could mean, the person who's trying to bridge the gap and sort of be that um, person in the middle, communicating between your developers or your end users who are actually using your project and the creators of the project, or just an organization who's actually put the project out. Um, but when my role goes much more beyond that, so I'm also involved in community building for the projects that we have in SUSE, especially the cloud native side. Not to completely isolate the Linux side of things, but cloud native is where I'm a little more proficient in terms of uh, experience and level of knowledge. So I guess that's why I advocate and speak about those projects in a bit more detail. And over and above that, I also like help be that feedback loop, wherein I speak to people who are in the community, who are using our projects, and feed it back to our engineers, or if they have any questions, or if they have any um, uh, what do I say, concerns around specific features of the project. um, I convey it back. We have various forums where we interact with them, and we try to bring in the engineers who actually work on the project as well to interact with these folks. But summarizing the whole thing, I think it would be just being that person in the middle who's actually being the bridge between the two extremes of the spectrum. But did that answer your question, or
Yeah, I
do I
think
need to
so.
clarify a bit more?
I one of the things I wanted to kind of talk about, and it's kind of related to technical advocacy or technical evangelism, is you have a pretty heavy involvement in things around documentation, and what I'm kind of curious
Yeah.
about is like, are those are those kind of two pursuits related? Does one cause the other, or basically it's kind of like, what is your kind of contribution to documentation? Why do you think it's important, or what is important about kind of the contributions that people make to documentation in general, to a community and to like a piece of software?
Yeah, so I speak from personal experience when I say that documentation is extremely essential when it comes to a project, a product, um, whether it's open source, whether it's proprietary, whatever be the case. If you do not have appropriate documentation, um, it's going to be really tough to actually attract users. And even if you end up attracting your potential audience, you will end up like having a steep onboarding curve set out for them. Because if your documentation is not really great, it doesn't have that user friendly, accessible nature to it, it is going to sort of put your users off, and tell them that maybe you should actually try another project where you're you're able to understand stuff better. So in my opinion, I have been a part of so many crisis calls and outage calls, and you know thi- events where a lot of money is stuck online, and I have been at the receiving end of or rather I have been at the end where I have to actually go through documentation and not really find the solution I'm looking out for. I have been frustrated by it so many times that that's one of the things that actually propelled me towards the technical writing side of things earlier on, in my cloud native journey. um but coming to your point, I think these two are very integrated. When you speak about evangelizing, when you speak about putting your product out there or your project out there, one of the very first things that has to be out there is also your documentation. Because like it or not, it's the first marketing piece that's there out. Like how many ever billboards you put up, how many ever ads you have, how many ever campaigns you have, that's the first thing that you consume as an end user, as a developer, or as a whatever. So you have to consume that piece of documentation first to understand the technology. So I wouldn't say it's a form of technical evangelism, but it's very interrelated to what I do currently, and it's something I'm extremely passionate about as well, even though I have moved on from the role of the technical writer in my organization. I just recently moved on, so I still go back and tell people that it's important that your docs are still up to date, and not really up, it's not even the case of being up to date, it's more on the case of accessibility. It's more around how you structure your documentation, make it more user friendly. All of that matters. Like, the content matters, sure, but it has to be put in a specific way. If you just write technical jargon in your documentation, how is like a person who's just getting started supposed to know that that particular phrase means something in you know that is important or integral to that product. So it's very important, because the whole point of evangelism or advocacy is to simplify the onboarding experience, is to actually communicate that that project exists and to help developers use that project. So documentation figures into the whole cycle, but again, it's not like it's a part, but it definitely figures in the whole cycle of actually evangelizing for your project. So if you do not have good documentation, all your evangelism efforts are really not going to work. Your advocacy is not going to work.
Right, right.
I can, sorry. I mean to cut you. I was gonna add that I can totally relate to that, because when I started with my Kubernetes journey, not everyone around me knew about it, and I found the documentation in the community, and now I know, like, there is a example, or reference for whatever projects that I look at, and sometimes I can even I I I will go a bit further and then say, like, I judge the projects and products based on their documentation, you know. And Divya, you also mentioned a little bit about the technical writing, and everyone is, so the developers are, they are not trained on writing, and I think that should be a skill that should be like taught, but it's not, and people don't do it. And do you have any, like, a little bit of tips and tricks on how to, like, they can write good technical documentation for the feature that they are working on? Like you mentioned one thing, that don't use a lot of jargons, but is there anything in addition to that that you can say that would help the viewers and me too personally?
No, so I learned from you. So I mean, like, you were my first whole entry point into the ecosystem. So I mean, you've taught me a lot. But um to come back to the question, I guess the first thing that I would probably want to say is use simple words. Even if it's not technical jargon, sometimes people think it's like an essay writing competition. It's not. You do not need to use really flowery fancy words, and show your prowess in English or in any other language to actually start writing technical documentation. If you are able to explain it to a 5-year-old, so I actually judge technical documentation that way now, that if you're able to explain it to my 5-year-old nephew, and you're able to read it out and my 5-year-old nephew is able to understand it, yeah, I mean, that's like the pinnacle of um excellence for me. But I understand that not everybody can start off there, not everybody can actually um start off writing like that. So the first thing that I would say is, understand what you want to convey when you're talking about a feature. Like, you might want to convey specific things, you might want to look at it from you might want to dive deep, and start off like at level 100. But also keep in mind that not everybody reading your documentation is going to start off at level 100. People are going to probably start at level 0 or even below that if there is. So try to keep that thing in mind. Then next, obviously, you should have some sense of grammar and syntax in the language that you're writing in. I wouldn't say that you have to be an avid reader or like a prolific writer, but you need to have at least an intermediate level of um, excellence in the language that you're trying to write, primarily because if sentences are structured in a particular way, they could mean one thing, and if they're structured in a particular in another way, they could mean another thing altogether. So you need to have that grasp, know your basic grammar and syntax, and know how sentence structuring and phrasing it in a particular way could mean something totally different. Like, you need to have that knowledge, and for that, I think more than um, intermediate level of knowledge of the language is not required. And last but not the least, don't, like I said, introduce technical jargon at all, because I've seen a lot of projects, in the very first overview page they will write like 10 things, and all of the 10 concepts will have no linking to any other website, will have no context settings. So suppose a project is leveraging some other technology or some other framework, and you have to say that this project uses that framework. Do not assume that that person knows about that framework. Hyperlink it, talk about it in at least 2 or 3 lines, make that person understand why that why your project is leveraging that framework. Set the context for that person, because nobody is going to come with like the amount of context that you have when you're writing the documentation. So link it, have like references in your if you can't link it, have references down, noted somewhere in your page, so that that person can go and visit that page later on. So those are the three things that come like right off the top of my head. But there's a lot more to unpack as you learn. There's like sectioning, there's like structuring of the documentation, stuff like that. But that comes with time. Like I did not start out as a trained technical writer either. I had like fantastic mentors um over the course of my journey, and they helped me become who I am. So you will not start off great. First draft is always going to be trash. So do not expect to write a great first draft, but you improve over time, and practice, maybe it might not make you perfect, but it'll kind of get you closer to it.
So I have so many comments. The first one being, it's actually something I regularly say in most of my classes, particularly ones related to like kind of programming, is how terrible a language English is, and actually how terrible all spoken languages are, in the sense that it is so difficult to communicate what's in your head to somebody else, right?
Yeah.
This is why like requirements gathering is so difficult. And kind of related to that, when you're talking about something like documentation, you can, it doesn't matter, this is what makes a brilliant writer, right? Is that the closer you can get to what's actually in your head to the paper, that, the more brilliant you are, right? But then kind of a related topic, or kind of two similar topics, this is one of the reasons I'm really glad that I went to a liberal arts college. And even though many people in the technical fields complain about like core, where you have to go and take a writing class, right? Or maybe even several writing classes. This is why it's so important, is because being able to read and write at a kind of a sophisticated level is really important no matter what you do, right? And then the last comment I wanted to make was that, and you kind of alluded to it at the end, which is that just get something on paper or written. It doesn't really matter what it is or how good it is. Just write it and then go back and fix it, right? Like people, I think, get often scared by the blank page, right? Even if you can even go so far as to kind of take some other piece of content, right, and adapt it. And sometimes my adaptions are 100% replacement eventually, right? And so the key is get something out and then just keep going, keep going, keep going. The other thing, and then my last comment, but I think then we should probably move on, which is just that one of, I think, the biggest failures of writing on the internet these days, or kind of in general, is that the entire point of that whole like HTTP and HTML thing, why it differentiated from books, is because you can immediately cross-reference. But no one does it, in my opinion, anywhere near enough, right? Where you can just say, hey, if you do want to use all that technical jargon, or you haven't figured out how to write it in such a way that you can get rid of it yet, you can always have a glossary and you can always have links, right? And that's the magic of being able to write on the web. That like I said, sometimes maybe I go a little overboard, like I have too many links, but at the same time, there's a lot of, I think people don't capture the fact that your content is not standalone when it's web-based, right? Which I think is hugely important. But yeah, so what I wanted to kind of move on to a little bit is, when we were kind of talking about this show in advance, it seems like you've been getting pretty heavily involved in what's called WebAssembly. And
Yep.
we've actually, weirdly enough, had a number of people on the show who've talked about WebAssembly. And so what I'm first curious to hear is like, okay, there's a technology there, but what's your take on it? Like, why do people keep getting interested in it? What is it about WebAssembly that is kind of maybe changing things, and why would it be changing things?
So, to be honest, this is a question I asked myself last year when I started getting involved, rather not getting involved, rather learning it myself. Because at first glance, WebAssembly looks like something that's made for the web and probably is like similar to assembly language programming or stuff like that. Like, why would anyone be interested, is the first question I asked myself. And then I of course went down into a rabbit hole and dug like I've never done before. And I discovered various other facets where WebAssembly could actually be utilized, and they were already being done. So, um, it's no longer just for the web. It was introduced as a specification that would, like, bring more languages to the web. And it was, kept not kept, rather announced with that in mind. But as the framework matured, and we're still maturing, it's not like we're done. As the framework matures, I think we are seeing more applications in the server side, and there are several cloud native projects that actually leverage WebAssembly. And it's interesting because you would think that with containerization we've sort of reached the pinnacle of all abstraction, right? But it's not the case, because you still have that very last layer of abstraction in the form of maybe your application libraries, or code, language specific libraries that need to be included for your code to run in every execution environment. Imagine that level being taken away as well. Imagine that you have an environment, um, you have a container, or and it's very much possible because there is a lot of good work being done. So imagine that last layer of abstraction also being added to your workloads. You can possibly run your code anywhere, write it once and run anywhere, was like where we started off with this whole Java and all of the other things, right? um, WebAssembly is the hope that it's actually going to happen. And with more and more cloud native projects adopting it, and adopting extending support for WebAssembly, more languages actually extending support for the WebAssembly framework, I think we are going to reach there. It might take more convoluted approach because it's like there is like a lot of work to be done still. It's not just that easy to like overhaul an entire system that's been built for maybe I don't know, as long as I've been alive. So it's not as easy, but I think we are getting there. We are going to run right once, run anywhere approach. We're also um, going we are also as an industry moving towards the edge, right? Like we want stuff to work on edge. We want our compute closer to storage. We want our workloads to run on multiple CPU architectures. We want all of that. And with WebAssembly, that's going to be more easier to achieve, because like I said, it introduces that last level of abstraction that we've not had with containers so far. So I hope that answers your question, because I've
Yeah,
like went
I
into
think
like
I
a
think that I
philosophical
mean
side of things.
I was going to comment. It's interesting you brought up Java because I was thinking while you were talking about it. It's like, JavaScript was named JavaScript based on the popularity of Java, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
and in so many ways it was a mistake, right? Because
yeah,
JavaScript and Java have very little to do with each other. It not only
yeah,
kind of in syntax, but also like in like just like in usage, style of language, etc. And WebAssembly, I wonder if it's suffering kind of from the same thing, where it sounds as you said, right? It sounds a lot like assembler, right? And and I know I don't know about you, but I don't want to do assembler, and so it kind of has this challenge with kind of, while it's technically correct for its name, right? Because I mean, it is a compiled kind of scenario that's kind of happening on the fly. I mean, it is a weird concept, but at the same time, it does kind of provide that barrier to entry. Kind of alluding back to what we were talking about before, I think this is where documentation comes in, right? In the sense that, your first foray into that needs to be to understand that really it's just a way to run, your blob of code in a more efficient way. You don't really actually, in a lot of cases, need to know that much about how WebAssembly even works in order to kind of leverage its feature set. The other thing I wanted you to maybe elaborate on a little bit. So it's funny, there's the term edge with, think about it in terms of like a capital E, right? But with WebAssembly, it's actually both the traditional edge that we've talked about before, for years now, with a lowercase e, and then this kind of capital one, right? And so in my mind, we have applications that are delivered through a browser, right? And where a lot of the functionality takes place on the client side. And I think of that as like lowercase e, right? But then kind of related to that, we're starting this, new buzzword, bingo around the term edge with a capital E, where we want to put it, put our content on servers kind of as close to the end user as possible. And we see this with like, I just blanked on the term, but I'll use an example like Akamai. We see it with companies like Akamai CDNs, which is kind of like in the right path. But why does WebAssembly potentially make both maybe like I think of it as lowercase e and capital E, or one or the two of them? What are your thoughts there about how, particularly with Kubernetes, does WebAssembly bring some more edge, to that tool chain or to that platform?
Right. Take the smaller case, like you said, for the first example, like I'll explain there, and then we move on to capital one. So, if we talk about like having applications delivered on the browser, WebAssembly is basically a binary format, which is why the name has assembly in it. It's like just a binary code format, and essentially it's just the output of a compiler. So you, like you said, you don't need to know how to write assembly to actually learn more about WebAssembly. So when what in the case of the smaller, uh, you know non-capitalized edge, what happens is that there weren't a lot many programming languages that could be brought to the web, because most of them had to actually traditionally compile to JavaScript, since JavaScript was the de facto programming language. And this was getting a little strenuous, given that there were performance issues cropping up with applications, like that ran heavy workloads. So for example, like if you had a web app for Figma or Photoshop or something run, you would notice performance issues. And fun fact, they are also, I think, one of the I wouldn't say first, but like one of the few first adopters of WebAssembly, because they have, like, Adobe is one of the adopters of WebAssembly. They have integrated like WebAssembly into their products. So they do use WebAssembly. So it's one of those cases where you have a binary code format, that is the output of a compiler, um, enabling you to bring more content onto the web, in the sense that you just need to write your own code in whatever language you prefer. The only caveat is that the code that you write, or the programming language that you write it in, has to have um, a compiler that actually translates it to the WebAssembly format. So if you do that, you can actually have you know your code, then leveraging the WebAssembly framework to um, have this on the web. So that's one thing. And when you talk about the capital edge, you are going to have a number of different architectures that your devices are running on. It's not going to be like, hey, I am going to have like the standard architecture that we have here, and we could probably be running on a Raspberry Pi. Or there have been several use cases, not specific to WebAssembly, of course, but specific to other workloads that I've heard of in the Kubernetes space, wherein they're running on like submarines and rocket ships and stuff like that. So in that case, imagine having to run all of your code, all of your workloads, and write it in very specific languages, and having to sort of take all of that packaging and put it in a device that does not really have the capability to run that much of code. Like you do like the devices are pretty compact. They are, you know they do not have as much storage, and they do not have as much processing capability as a traditional machine would have. Assume that you're trying to put a large amount of code, just or go code or whatever the code that you think of, on that device, and you end up you end up having to rewrite it for every specific architecture that you're trying to put it on. WebAssembly sort of takes away that as well, because it's like portable across architectures, not just languages. And with the, like I said, with the different um, language compilers being supported, and extending their support right now, it's able to actually cover a wide range of applications, although we're not really mature yet. Like, again, we are still very much um, in a very nascent phase, because
Sure,
there's a lot of capabilities that are not very inbuilt into the whole framework. For example, if you're talking about assembly, or assembly programs, or even binary code formats, you are not going to have all the fancies and frills that come with a higher level programming language, like memory allocation. That's the first thing that comes to your mind, right? Like when you talk about a high level programming language like Java, it does all the memory stuff and you don't need to really take care of it unless your app breaks. So WebAssembly does not have that. It does not have like a lot of networking capabilities. It's sandbox. So there are specifications that are being built and developed, like there's the WASI spec, there's the WAGI spec, there's the WAPC spec. So there are different protocols, there are different frameworks that are being built as an ecosystem to support WebAssembly, and to let it actually enable people to do what we started off with, like write once, run end goal that we want to achieve. And of course, to help improve that developer experience altogether. Like you do not need to worry about what language you're using and what architecture you're running on. You just need to write it in a language that's comfortable to you, and eventually we probably will have a compiler that supports it. Yeah.
so So before we move on from there, I just wanted to say, I mean, this is the KBE Insider show, right? So
Yeah.
as you were kind of saying, is WebAssembly is kind of nascent, both in what it can do as well as in adoption. Think out a year from now. Let's not talk too much further than that, just because then we get into science fiction. But maybe a year from now, maybe it's a little bit longer. Who knows? But what do you think is going to change about like kind of working with Kubernetes and working in kind of the Kubernetes ecosystem, assuming that everything goes awesomely for WebAssembly, it gets adopted, that heavily, and the technology gets more robust, et cetera. What do you see that changing about Kubernetes over the next year?
So there are a lot of projects that I've just recently started, announcing their support in the cloud native space for WebAssembly as well, like OPA Gatekeeper, which is like the Kubernetes, which is like a tool release. It's not recent in the sense like recent, but fairly recent. It announced support for WebAssembly. I actually sort of see more and more projects going down this line. And I also remember this one announcement tweet from Ralph. Just a second, if I can actually put the link to that here, it would be great. But I would like to actually even say that um, that was a very big, you know, step forward in terms of where we are with WebAssembly in the cloud native ecosystem. And it was such a cool thing uh, that I even retweeted it. Just a second though. But coming back to the question, um, I think that with um, it's basically going to have like projects are going to basically start supporting WebAssembly within the cloud native ecosystem. So the one that I was talking about is here. It was just on December 2nd, so I'll just paste the link here. And that's this one. So the container shim for run Wazi was sort of accepted as an upstream project supporting WebAssembly in the CNCF. That was announced last week. So I think this is one like uh, not predecessor, maybe it's a sign of good things to come, is what I could say.
Cool.
That
Yeah, I just sorry. Go ahead, Sarita.
that is like really awesome. Like I've been putting off learning, and I know like Wasm is like up and coming, and I have seen Divya co-chair the Wasm Cloud Native Con co-located event. I totally forgot the name, but I think it's related to Wasm, and it's a co-located event. So like I am going to make it a point in this day of learning. So Red Hat has this day of learning every quarter. So probably this time I'm gonna dedicate that to Wasm so that I can learn a little bit more about it. Um, and to take a slight detour from the WebAssembly, I want to like talk a little bit more about the KCNA exam. So you were involved, you were one of the co-creators of the exam, and can you talk a little bit more about it and like who who is eligible to take it, or like do you have to have experience in the cloud native field to even attempt the exam? And once you have gotten that certification, what does it mean like for the person who has obtained it, and also like from perspective of their career growth? So do like how can they use it? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the main reason why I actually got involved in the whole exam process, to be honest, it was an honor. That's one thing. But one of the main reasons why I got involved was like, this is an exam that I wish I had when I started out. It's something that I always try to do wherever I go, that I try to be the person that I wanted when I started off. Because when at least I started off, there weren't a lot of signposts. I mean, there were, but there weren't a lot of signposts around how to get started with the cloud native ecosystem. And even if I did have that signpost, I did not know how to go from, say, point A to point B. The only available certifications were like really intimidating. It was CKA, CKAD, and the year that I joined, they introduced CKS. I was like, I do not know a thing about the Kubernetes or the cloud native ecosystem. And suddenly, here I am trying to, learn something for CK. Fun fact, I have still not taken a CK exam because I keep postponing it and now it's expired. But the whole thing is that I was very intimidated to take this exam in the very first year. And when the opportunity came up on my radar to help design or help create questions and review questions for this exam, I just jumped at it. So it's an extremely basic level, it requires extremely basic level knowledge of the Kubernetes and the cloud native ecosystem. So when you enter any ecosystem, it does not need to be, Kubernetes and cloud native. Even when you say switch from your schooling to your college, or from college to say a job, um, there is a different vocabulary used everywhere. You do not use the same vocabulary. So I remember when I switched from college to actually my first job, I used to call people sir and ma'am, because that's how we refer to people in academia. You call them, you give them respect, and that was the first thing that was told to me in my office, that you don't refer to it. So that's just a very basic example, but there were so many other differences. And when you come into the cloud native ecosystem, and when you come into the Kubernetes ecosystem, it's going to go far beyond, not just calling people sir and ma'am. It's going to entail an understanding of what Kubernetes is. And once you learn about Kubernetes, and it's I do not know how many concepts, I've lost track of the concepts page, but the number of concepts that it has, if you ever get to the end of those, you have another ecosystem to learn that surrounds it. Like, you have stuff like Helm, you have things around Grafana, Prometheus has its own exam now. So I mean, you have like things related to the cloud native ecosystem that you need to learn more of. And should you wish to get involved, need to know the terminologies associated with the ecosystem as well. Like, you need to know what is a sig, what is a tag, what is, like, how is the how is the CNCF actually, you know how do the projects work, how what is the code of conduct, stuff like that. Like, you do not know all of this right off the bat when you come into an ecosystem. And you do not know if you know everything without actually getting tested. Because if you do not assess yourself in some form or the other, you're not going to understand where you stand among your peers. And this is where I think the KCNA comes in, and it's a brilliant exam, not just because I helped in the co-creation, but I think it's something that is required, like a basic entry level exam to test your knowledge. Because who will, if you build stuff without having firm foundations, if you just run into something like I did, it's going to take you far longer to understand everything. Like, you cannot start randomly putting puzzle pieces without seeing where they fit. You have to ensure that things fit in a particular order. So if I start learning Kubernetes without knowing, say, where it came from, and if I directly start learning Kubernetes, maybe security, without understanding even the basics of security, it's not going to make sense. So you need that basic level knowledge. And within this ecosystem, this is the best way to actually test that knowledge. And that's what I think is my definition of the exam. And literally anybody can take it, um, if they want to test themselves on the foundational knowledge that they have gained with maybe work experience, or with maybe just contributing, or even just tinkering on their local laptop. It's meant to it's meant to not demotivate you. It's meant to sort of test your knowledge. And if should you pass and should you clear, which it's not that difficult, uh you will be able to move on and learn more about a specific project or specific set of projects. If you are looking to diversify more into the administrative side of Kubernetes, you could go to CKA. But that's, again, I'm going to tell you that that's a very steep curve to take, because CKA is going to be very, very operations focused, coming from a very and I come from a very operation side of things, so I know that it's going to be a lot operations focused. And you have the CKAD, which is developer focused, and you have CKS, which has like more security focused stuff. So taking the KCNA is like the very first step. Then you need to like dive deeper and figure out what is the specialization that you want to do. Or if you don't even want to do like Kubernetes, now we have PC, which is the Prometheus certified associate. But again, that's an entry level for the Prometheus side of things. Um, so
So I
you
think
can choose these various things. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think you bring up a really good point. It's like one of the kind of whether you feel like you need an exam or a certification or whatever to decorate your LinkedIn profile or whatever. One of the things that's super nice about exams is that some experts have said, hey, if you know all of these things, you've got a pretty good coverage of kind of the space of knowledge. And so it can be a really good way to just kind of guide how you learn, to kind of say, okay, well, these are the topics covered, so maybe I should go kind of learn those together. And if I can then pass the exam, that means I probably have a pretty good idea of what
Yeah.
of the space. And I think, so I know for me, I've never been much for kind of like the certifications and exams. I know a lot of people who are. They really like that checkbox. They really like that badge or whatever. But what I have used them for, which I think is super useful, is like I said, is kind of there's an expert who said, hey, here's how you get a well-rounded view of the space, right? And kind of some guidance of where to start. Which can be
Yeah.
super helpful.
Yeah.
Because it can be kind of, some people might find it mildly overwhelming, the thousands of pages of documentation and, all the different glossary items and everything else that you have to learn. I just wanted to point out, we did actually write a blog post about the KubeBy example about the exam, and also your co-creator, Katie, and the interview we did with her in Detroit. Which we'll use. Sorry, Savita, did you want to talk some more about the exam at all, or did you? I was going to use it as a segue.
No, I could relate to one thing. Not much. I don't want to add much, but I just have one thing to say that I did take the KCA, and it was not. It was overwhelming, to be honest. So I wish I had something like a KCNA to dip my toes in the water and check like, oh, do I want to do further in this thing? And do I want to like not do? It would have been like amazing. So kudos for creating such a awesome course. And thank you. I don't have any more thing to add on that question. So back to you, Langdon.
Yeah. We should like pass the mic around. We can do it like through the camera view. Yeah, so the segue, of course, was as Savita knows, and Divya, I think did I meet you at KubeCon? I think we met in kind of passing while I was walking down a hallway.
Yeah, we were running across each other in the hallway, like, and it was not in slow motion, so we were basically running in opposite directions. So yeah,
it's more the I don't remember where I was a lot of the time. So I used to joke about when I was traveling a lot. I would get off the plane and have to like look at the airport to remember what place I had gone to.
Yeah.
But what I was gonna say is you saw the car and some other people have seen the car, but one of the things we did at KubeCon was we basically I took various people around on car rides and we interviewed them, kind of like this show, except much shorter. And we were in a cool Ford Mach-E car.
Yeah, I did see that.
So the reason I was bringing up the segue is because I interviewed Katie, and there's a link to that, to the interview in the car or whatever. And so those have been dropping basically since KubeCon every so often, like once a week or something. But they're all on the KubeBy example site now, and they're I think they're hilarious. Like to be honest, I can't believe how well it came off. Like it went. Like I thought it was really good. Like Savita, I think you felt the same.
It was wonderful because two reasons. I didn't have to drive. I got to talk, and I got to like be in like I did not know anything about the marquee before I even
No, yeah.
got into it, and then I learned a lot about it, and I'm like, oh wow! Then it was a cool car, like I felt like a cool kid all of a sudden getting into the car, and it was so much fun. And I got to explore one new place called Belle Isle. Thanks, Langdon, and thanks for not taking me to Canada. So
Yes.
yes, we got to talk about conveyor and community, Kubernetes community, and like how things are. The community is community involvement is like kind of like transferable, and what keeps things going. Yeah, it was so much fun. And on that note, I also want to mention that the blog is out today. So please, I think it came out yesterday. So please, if you're interested in seeing my video and many others' video too, it's all available in the KBE website.
And just to clarify, I like Canada. I would love to go to Canada, but when we're driving on that route in Detroit, it's very easy to get trapped in the Canada, lane, and we didn't all have passports. We didn't all have the ability to go into the country, et cetera, et cetera. So we were concerned about our relationship with customs more than we were worried about our passport control,
Exactly.
because we dislike Canada or anything.
Oh, no, no. Oh, sorry. It might have come off like that. Thank you for bringing that up. I really want to visit. It's just that if I had crossed the border, it would have made me illegal to come back. So
Right, right. So we had a lot of good reasons for not crossing the border. However, it was no knock on Canada as much as
yeah,
international.
no shade.
But so yeah, and we just posted links to all the videos, and they're up, and go check them out. They're pretty entertaining. Divya, I wanted to give you the chance. Did you have any other things you wanted to add about what you're kind of seeing in the next, what you're interested in? What else is there besides WebAssembly that you're finding really particularly interesting? Because I think the temptation is, well, all the things, but is there anything specific that you
Yeah.
would like to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very wrong question to ask me, because I'm like, Savita knows this very well. I basically just like go behind every new thing that comes, and I'm like, we even gave a talk about it at the KubeCon in Valencia, where I just dabble in way too many things and burn out really quickly. So but that being said, one interesting thing that I'm actually more I'm very focused on right now is to look at various multi-tenancy solutions, and I'm very interested in that space, because like it or not, nobody's actually going to want to stay locked down to one provider, or have like a single cloud provider taking care of all of their needs, because it's either going to be a hybrid implementation, or it's going to have like a spread of various cloud providers. So it's one thing that is very interesting to me, because there are a lot of challenges that come associated with that implementation when it comes to Kubernetes specifically. So scaling and all the other problems that come along with it are very interesting to me, because I was one of the administrators in my previous company for the Kubernetes team. So that's one thing that I realize is like a challenge, and it's one thing that I'm interested in. Another thing, like, I think is very interesting is maybe, for me specifically, would be how we manage to actually, when we do this multi-tenancy thing, how we manage to also implement all the um, frills and fancies that are associated with a normal traditional setup, like scaling out your observability setup, scaling out your um, everything, basically scaling out your security, ensuring that the same level of security is maintained in multi-tenant setup. So a lot to do with multi-tenancy, but also interested in how it all scales out to actually deliver the same level of service that it does now. But primarily, yeah, just multi-tenancy would be the first thing that I'd say, because everything else comes uh as an after effect, I think, because everything else is like on top of that for me.
Right. Yeah,
So yeah.
multi-tenancy in basically every scenario terrifies me. It's always the like massive wrinkle of like trying
Yeah.
to do any system, especially when it's not built kind of built in at the beginning. But any which way, it's still like one of those places where there's just so many potential gaps. Um,
Yeah.
so I think we should probably wrap it up here. We're about at the top of the hour, and I'd like to say thanks, Divya, so much for being on the show. We really appreciate it, and hope to have you back. Maybe we'll interview you in a car in the next time we do a series. We do have grand plans for Amsterdam for doing something. We don't
Ooh.
know what yet exactly, but
Is it
we're
going to be on
hoping.
the canal?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe a submarine or something. Who knows? But yeah,
That would
so
be
we'll have to
cool.
see what happens. Savita, did you have any other closing remarks?
No. Thank you, Divya, again for coming to the show. And the submarine would be so cool.
Right?
Not so cool for my phobia, but it will be like super cool. You know.
Yeah, I'm just throwing out crazy ideas to, and then we can, I don't know, will it be a letdown if we deliver on something reasonable, or will it be, oh, thank God they didn't do something terribly insane? So we'll see how it goes. All right, thanks again.
Thank you so much
Thanks.
for having